Misconceptions and Refutations about Islam Part 2. Chapter 02. How people are influenced by contemporary misconceptions. When analyzing a problem or a social phenomenon, many people tend to simplify its causes. They often cast a casual look at it. When some serious questions are asked, such as, why do some of our young people turn to atheism, or, why do they reject the Sunnah, some people give one or two simple reasons. This is the wrong approach, because the problem is a complex one and has many causes, some of which overlap. I have reflected on this problem for long and have identified many contributing reasons. These I have examined and classified under separate headings. I am breaking down the various problems into those caused by external or internal influences. Other problems are the result of methodological and advocacy shortcomings. Type 1. External influences. 1. Social media. Everyone knows that there is much good, benefit, exchange of knowledge and mutual care that is done through social media. But such are also the principal mediums for transmitting misconceptions and problems. They have also helped to put the misconceptions of old times in front of those who are easily influenced by dubious ideas. Social media provide easy mediums to those who want to spread misconceptions, without going through difficult and complex procedures. People who want to achieve fame have adopted dissident attitudes and odd ideas, using social media to gain publicity and fame. Moreover, social media spreads misconceptions to all sorts of people, thereby giving the problem an added risk dimension. 2. Cinema and fiction. Television and books rarely have the same appeal to young people, of both sexes, as films and novels. This tends to broaden the population group that are influenced by the latter. The problem here is that their influence is indirect, as they present a totally alien culture, with all that it involves of right and wrong, good and evil. There is no possibility here to exclude what is contrary to Islamic values. 3. Various direct contacts with foreign cultures, including education. The main problem here is that a young Muslim is taught by non-Muslim teachers, some of whom endeavor to spread atheist concepts. Some students, including postgraduate ones, have fallen prey to such attempts. If we ensure that our students go to educational establishments equipped with certainty of belief and a good standard of Islamic knowledge that enables him or her to evaluate new ideas and information, the situation would be much easier. 4. Availability of what is desirable yet forbidden. We live at a time that is characterized by widespread sexual temptation. The question then arises, is there any connection between the availability of illicit sex and susceptibility to misconceptions? The problem with temptation in our times is that it has taken on different manifestations and attained several stages, one stage leading to the next. It can, thus, easily become predominant within a young person's mind and emotional set. When they become so influential, a person may feel religious duties to be too demanding. They then seek some way to stop what detracts from enjoying such tempting desires. They want to enjoy without facing the guilt for having resorted to illicit ways of fulfillment. One such outcome is to disbelieve or to deny accountability in the life to come. This sequence of events may not be the most frequent in reality, but it is possible and its outcomes very serious. From another point of view, frequent indulgence in sin without following it with repentance and a resolve not to revert to it leads to make one's heart rusty, and when such rust accumulates, one cannot see the truth. This is as God says in the Quran, their own deeds have cast a layer of rust over their heart. 83:14. If barriers gather around one's heart, the light of faith becomes dim and a person is likely to be influenced by even casual doubt or a flimsy misconception. An authentic hadith related by Al-Taimiyah and others quotes the Prophet as saying, when a person commits a sin, a black spot settles on his heart. If he regrets it and turns to God in repentance, his heart is cleared. If he repeats it, the black spot increases until eventually it covers all his heart. This is the rust God mentions as he says, their own deeds have cast a layer of rust over their heart. We must not ignore such abstract concepts Islam mentions when we try to understand any problem related to moving away from religion. 5. The material progress of the West and the influence of Western culture. The German author Sigrid Hunk wrote her famous book Allah's Sohn über dem Abendland, or Allah's Son over the Occident. This book was published in 1960. She wrote another entitled Allah ist ganz anders, or Allah is unlike that. In this book she defends Muslim and Islamic history and civilization. She quotes an interesting and important text which describes an attitude similar to what many Muslims experience today as they look with admiration at Western civilization. She quotes the Bishop of Cordova as he speaks of the superiority of Islamic civilization. He laments the status of his people, saying, "Many of my co-religionists read tales of the Arabs and study the writings of Muslim philosophers and religious scholars. They do not do so to refute them, but to master the Arabic language and be able to express themselves in good and fine style. Where do we have today a non-specialist Christian who can read Latin exegesis of the Bible? Where do we find Christians who study the four Gospels and the books of prophets and the Acts of the Apostles? Many of my co-religionists read tales of the Arabs and study the writings of Muslim philosophers and religious scholars. They do not do so to refute them, but to master the Arabic language and be able to express themselves in good and fine style. Where do we have today a non-specialist Christian who can read Latin exegesis of the Bible? Where do we find Christians who study the four Gospels and the books of prophets and the Acts of the Apostles? What a disaster. Christians have even forgotten their mother tongue. You can hardly find 1 in 1,000 among them who can compose a simple letter in good Latin, while those who have mastered written and spoken Arabic are countless. Indeed, some can write poetry in Arabic. They even excel the Arabs in that regard. I mention the cinema and fiction as the second factor that helps to introduce Western values indirectly into our community. On its own, this factor is not strong unless coupled by a sense of defeatism among Muslims. In Al-Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun stated a maxim that became world famous. This concerns the influence of the victor over the vanquished. I may summarize it as follows: the vanquished will always try to emulate the victor in his dress, transport and weapons and how to make and use these. Indeed, the vanquished emulates the victor in all situations. If two communities are geographically close and one of them is superior to the other, the weaker one will import much of the stronger's habits and practices. Abdullah al-Ujairi's book Yambu al-Giwaya al-Fikriyah tackles this subject in an interesting and appealing way. In his introduction, the author says that many of the erroneous ideas that have been floated in our times are due to a combination of two things: the dominance of foreign culture and the lack of submission to God and His Messenger. He then adds, when you reflect on the different intellectual trends that have swept through the Muslim community in recent history, you will realize the impact of dominant cultural patterns on the formation of concepts and ideas. You can then explain the attempts to give an Islamic guise to some Western or Eastern ideologies. When socialist ideology was on the rise, a socialist reading of Islam was presented, and when military values became predominant, Islam was given a military outlook. As the democratic political pattern gained ground, Islam was seen from a democratic angle. It is only natural then that when liberal philosophy is in vogue, Islam will be given a liberal color. Today, liberal values are sweeping the world and creating a general liberal mode. Indeed, this liberal mode is like a pressure cooker which produces an increasing conviction requiring the adoption of some or all these liberal values. Islamic religious texts are then interpreted in the light of such liberal values and concepts in an attempt to revise the Islamic outlook so as to fit liberal values. It is certainly important to analyze liberal concepts and explain the problems and wrong ways they imply, as well as their incompatibility with many Islamic values. However, such efforts are bound to be of little effect because these liberal concepts and values have the support of Western civilization which is predominant in our modern world. When I discuss protective measures, God willing, I will mention that rearranging the major priorities from a human perspective is an important factor in neutralizing the effect of this factor. Another very useful work in this area is Ibrahim al-Sakrani book Sultan al-Thaqafa al-Ghaliba, or Hegemony of the Dominant Culture. Type 2, Internal Influences. The external factors that contribute to the impact of the attack on Islam and its fundamental principles cannot produce their real effect unless they find a response from the target population. This means that they need to find loopholes and weak points in the target group. I will list here only 6 of these internal influences. 1. Lack of certainty. I am not going to discuss this factor at length despite its great importance, because I will be talking about it when I discuss protective measures. I only wish to raise here the following point. All Muslims agree that attending to obligatory prayers on time is the most important practical Islamic duty. Muslims also agree that delaying prayers until their time range has lapsed is one of the most serious sins. The question that arises is, how do we explain the fact that a substantial number of Muslims neglect to offer their obligatory prayers on time? I claim that lack of certainty of belief is the paramount reason, even though there are other reasons. Most Muslims are free of disbelief and atheism, despite their weak faith, because they have not been targeted by someone who tries to raise doubts in their minds about their faith. Were they to be exposed to some hard questioning about one of the fundamental principles of Islam, however, they may not be able to withstand such an attack. Ibn Taimiyah gives this beautiful description. Generally speaking, when people embrace Islam after being unbelievers, or when they are born into Muslim families and adhere to Islamic values, obeying God and His Messenger, they are considered Muslims and they have faith in a general way. However, the truth of faith gets into their hearts gradually, if God grants them this. Otherwise, many people do not get to the stage of certainty or to jihad. If doubts are raised before them, they may become doubtful. If they are ordered to join jihad, they may not do so. They are neither unbelievers nor hypocrites, but they simply do not have the inner knowledge and certainty that is necessary to prevent doubt. Nor do they have the sort of love of God and His Messenger that is dearer to them than their family or property. If such people are spared a trial and die in this condition of theirs, they go to heaven. If, on the other hand, they are faced with a situation that creates doubt and God does not grace them with what removes such doubt, they may become doubters and move into a type of hypocrisy. 2. Psychological problems and social pressures. I have had many discussions with different people about belief in God and often in situations whereby my interlocutors have been facing pressures and trials which they found difficult to deal with. It may often happen that a psychological problem or some pressure leads a person to be displeased with their lot or unhappy with God's will. Such a person may then deny God's existence or accuse him of being unjust or unwise. This factor is certainly not peculiar to our modern age. In the Quran, God tells us of people who worship him but then revert to disbelief as a result of some misfortune that befalls them. He says, some people worship God on the borderline of faith. If good befalls such a person, he is content, but if a trial assails him, he turns away utterly, thus losing this world and the life to come. This is, indeed, a loss beyond compare. 22:11. Ibn Abbas is quoted in al-Bukhari Sahih interpreting this verse as follows: a man may come to Medina. Then if his wife gives birth to a son and his horse gives him a calf, he says this is good. Related by al-Bukhari. If his wife does not give birth and his horse does not give him a calf, he says, this religion is bad. Ibn Sa'di, a fine commentator on the Quran, gives the following interpretation of this verse: some people are weak in faith. It has not settled in their hearts and they have not experienced its happy feelings. They might have embraced it out of fear, or through the force of habit. Therefore, it is shaken by trials. If good befalls such a person, he is content. This means that if he continues to have ample provisions and does not experience any adversity, he feels content at having such good fortune, not content with his faith. God may spare such a person and may not expose him to trials that test his faith. But if a trial assails him, causing him to experience some adversity or suffer the loss of someone who is dear, he turns away utterly, which means he abandons his faith, thus losing this world and the life to come. Losing this world means that he does not gain what he hoped to gain by abandoning his faith. He cannot compensate for his original loss. Thus, his efforts are in vain and he gets only what has always been ordained for him to have. The loss of the life to come is clear, as he is denied entry into heaven and justly incurs punishment in hell. This is, indeed, a loss beyond compare. And it is clearly so. 3. Lack of attention to worship and spirituality. Whenever a Muslim pays special attention to the depth of faith and nurtures the love of God in his heart, totally relies on him, and purges his heart of grudges, envy and conceit, such a Muslim will experience a sort of unrivaled happiness. Such a person will never entertain a thought of replacing this kind of happiness by any other feeling. The person who does not have such an experience may prefer any other type of attraction. 4. Lack of tools for research and documentation. When critical thinking prevails in a certain society and when the tools of research and study abound in it, it becomes more difficult for alien ideas to influence it. The reverse is also true. We see this clearly in the fact that a number of misconceptions have been circulated widely. Although protection against them needs no more than critical examination or academic study to render them ineffective. We will see that protective measures include the promotion of critical thinking and the strengthening of the tools of research. 5. Lack of Islamic knowledge. I conducted a questionnaire in 2 of my courses on dealing with contemporary misconceptions, asking about the causes behind this spread of misconception. Lack of Islamic knowledge among young people was among the top answers. Such lack of Islamic knowledge increases the possibility of being influenced by raised doubts and misconceptions. This is due to the fact that a good standard of knowledge gives a person a methodological basis to evaluate what he may receive of new information or analysis. By contrast, a person who lacks such a methodological basis is prone to confusion and serious errors of knowledge. 6. Time, mental and spiritual emptiness. I remember a woman who suffered one of the worst cases of obsession I have ever witnessed or heard of. I tried hard to persuade her to follow the methods of getting rid of her obsession, but none was effective. I think she consulted a psychiatrist, but he was not of much help either. I identified for her certain ways of study and acquiring knowledge, so as to fill her time and occupy her mind with, because she had absolutely nothing to do with her time. The result was quicker and better than I expected. Her questions, which used to be poured in quick succession, actually stopped in a very short time. I am not exaggerating and I have no need to exaggerate. What I want to say here is that mental and spiritual emptiness leaves one's mind and heart receptive to any thought, including that which is evil. A person whose time is full, and whose mind and spirit are preoccupied with the pursuit of knowledge, action and faith has an effective shield that protects from deviant ideas and nagging thoughts.